someone special. She was everyone's favourite mum, and we gave her a big welcome when she finally came here in 1966.
The Queen Mother came to pay us the visit she had to cancel 2 years earlier when she was indisposed. From Bluff, she went to Invercargill, Central Otago and the Lakes. This was the picture that possibly caught our imaginations more than any other. A lovely setting and a queen. A royal visit certainly wouldn't be the same without Maori entertainers, and her hosts at Rotorua put on a magnificent display for her.
Her hats were famous. She earned our affection. The Queen's mum seemed like everybody's. It wasn't America, but the Kiwi cowboys were just as tough. In 1949, while John Wayne was galloping across the silver screen, Kiwis were developing their own kind of cowboy.
At Miami, the Young Farmers Club stages a rodeo in true Wild West style. As some of the meanest man-killers in the province are turned loose, hard-riding bronco busters of all ages, sexes and capabilities experience some of the ups and downs of life. Here comes another bull-ring bruiser. It's a toss-up which is shaken off first, his head or himself. He loses. There's no bull about this. It's a girl on a steer, and believe me, she's steering for disaster. This is something revolutionary in bull-ring tactics. He's obviously trying to get the rider giddy. For a rough and tough sport, there's nothing to touch the rodeo. Ride 'em cowboy.
Our women were formidable leaders too. Mabel Howard, the first woman cabinet minister in the Commonwealth.
By my father.
4'11" and formidable, Mabel Howard was a fighter for what she called the bottom dog in society, and a legend for waving a pair of bloomers in Parliament.
The new Parliament will bring to light many points of great political interest, and included in the Cabinet is the new Minister of Health, Miss Mabel Howard.
The opening of Parliament has brought home to me very forcibly the great honour that has been done to the women of New Zealand by my to Cabinet rank. In the fields of health and education, women are strongly represented, and they have made a valuable contribution to our national development.
New Zealand and ANZ, 150 years young. In a country full of sheep, shearing became a national sport. Godfrey Bowen, champion shearer and showman. He developed a method which produced unblemished fleeces, and he was fast. In January 1953, he broke the world shearing record.
Nearly 5:30 now, and Godfrey's hobby of shearing sheep is almost over for the day. This is the last one, number 456. Bowen has beaten the record by 47 sheep, and during the day dropped about 2 tons of wool on the floor for his cobber to pick up, over 1,000 pounds worth. 447, 450, 453, 456. But there'll be no need for the new champion to count sheep to get some sleep tonight. Congratulations, Godfrey.
During the Depression, people thought small. 1933, and even the Great Depression couldn't stop the Kiwi do-it-yourselfer.
Here's just the bike for hard times. Mr. Jack Gibbons of Onehunga, Auckland, made this in his spare time, and it took 8 weeks to do. There are overhead valves, twin ports, and twin exhaust pipes. In fact, if he'd only made 2 of them, they'd be just the thing for the twins. It has all the latest conveniences: dynamo lighting, pressed steel frame, Peyton forks, hot and cold running water, 2 bed and 1 reception. I'm sorry, I got onto the wrong catalogue there. Anyhow, it runs 400 miles to the gallon, can do 40 miles per hour, has a 2-speed gearbox, and on 1 pint of oil can do 1,000 miles. And anyhow, if you want to walk home from the motorbike ride, you can pick it up and take it with you.
35 years later, pop music was the latest fad. The Chicks, Judy and Sue Donaldson. 2 mini-skirted sisters from Huapai who took the 60s teen scene by storm. They weren't quite the Supremes, just a couple of local girls in the latest gear. But Kiwi teenagers followed their every change of clothes. Long before television, we had our radio stars. Aunt Daisy. She was a legend in New Zealand radio for nearly 30 years.
Well,
Good morning, everybody. Here I am.
Women loved her homemaking hints and common sense advice. She visited the United States loaded with Kiwi advice and returned singing the praises of good old New Zealand.
Back again in New Zealand, which is the very easiest country in the world to live in and work in at the present time, I can assure you of
Not
that.
surprisingly, both political parties chased her to run for Parliament, but the diminutive Daisy stuck to broadcasting. She delivered her last words on the radio just a few days before her death in 1963.
School concerts.
By then, she'd become everyone's Aunt Daisy.
Well, good morning, everybody.
The new bridge was an Auckland sensation. The day they opened the Harbour Bridge, it was the 30th of May 1959 and 106,000 people turned up.
Driving into the Northcote Toll Plaza, the Governor-General Lord Cobham arrives to perform the opening ceremony. The harbour bridge being more or less nautical, the Navy provides the guard of honour. At the end of the bridge there's a big toll gate, and all the drivers that go through there have to pay the man some money. First day's toll takings total £5,000. 51,000 vehicles have passed through the booths. 4 years after construction began, the Auckland Harbour Bridge is open for business.
Before the bridge, Auckland's North Shore barely existed. It was the bridge that changed a city. It was country and western, Kiwi style.
Rosbo, and here we go.
There were 6 of them. 3 school teachers, a student of anthropology, and a bus mechanic. Band, and Beatles and Flower Power, they became a Kiwi, country and western sensation.
Kick that old town out of the way, you watch that fighting goose. Howdy, neighbor, howdy, get out and come right in. We'll make the ball of ready to stop your biscuits in. Pour a pot of coffee and eggs with the hand. Looking out, country hand, feet on your neck.
Before the age of the jetliner, there were boats that flew. They could fly, they could float. They were the new solid flying boats, and in Wellington, 1950, the flying boat to Sydney was the way to go.
Wellington sees a new aircraft when the Solent flying boat Ararangi uses Evans Bay as a landing and takeoff area. The Solent has been developed specially for long non-stop travel, and from every angle meets every need of passenger service.
By 1952, the airline Teal had carried almost 40,000 passengers on the 7-hour crossings from Auckland and Wellington. But 2 years later, the flying boats were gone, replaced by Douglas DC-6s, which did the trip in a mere 5 hours. In the 1930s, we found that good health could hurt. Kids called it the murder house, but the first Labour government attacked Kiwi tooth decay with a huge increase in school dental clinics.
Good teeth mean good citizens. Watch how the youngsters almost enjoy it. Can they take it? Oh, I'll say. In November 1935, the number of student dental nurses was 53. At the present time, there are 140, an increase of 87. A very considerable number of these will shortly be available for work in the school dental clinics throughout.
1,000 nurses had treated 500,000 New Zealand children, and the old views of dentistry as teeth-pulling torture were changing. But as late as the 50s, there was still a quite widespread belief that people were better off without their natural teeth. And then came the famous 5, the Lawson twins, Sam, Deborah, Selina, Shirlene and Lisa. He was an Auckland fish shop owner, and she became the most famous mother in New Zealand.
Proud parents Sam and Shirley Ann are no longer just plain Mr. and Mrs. Lawson. The multiple birth has thrown them into the dazzling glare of public interest. From now on, privacy is a luxury money won't buy.
The whole world wanted to see them and give them things.
One of the first gifts is a new car from a national grocery chain. A television set, blankets, mattresses. And hundreds of nappies. The flood continues.
The Lawsons. So famous, we just called them the Quins. Second Lieutenant Moana Nui Akiwa Narimu. He was the Maori battalion warrior from Ngāti Peru who won the Victoria Cross for his leadership of C Company's assault on a desert hill in 1943. It cost his life, and he became the first Maori VC.
8,000 Maoris and Pākehās have come to the ceremony
Today, tribal differences and old quarrels have been set aside. Lieutenant Ngarimu is regarded as belonging not to one tribe, but to the whole Maori people. After the ceremony, Mr. Ngarimu thanks the Maori people and the people of New Zealand for the honour.
He loved this country so well that he was glad to fight for it.
We took a very special dolphin into our hearts. Opo, first dolphin we'd taken into our hearts. Back in 1912, Pelorus Jack befriended New Zealanders down by Pelorus Sound. But when Opo came visiting in 1956, he became an international sensation and a New Zealand legend. They came from all over to see him. They even wrote a song about him.
Everybody loves him at old Poloni Bay. He's such fun for old and young. They all want him to stay. He's Opo the crazy dolphin. He's friendly as can be. If you should want to...
Opo died stranded on rocks, and we found he was a she. Crowds wept at her funeral. We'd known her for just a year. It was time to toughen up the townies. 1937, the King George V Memorial Appeal raised £176,000 to set up 5 permanent health camps. Weedy townies were treated to a dose of fresh air, sunshine and toothbrushing.
Children's health camps placed throughout the Dominion will be an ever-living memory to the people of New Zealand of the name of King George V. The purpose of the health camps is not to cure disease in children, but to prevent it by building their reserves of health and fitness. We want more of these camps, and for the children's sake and for New Zealand's good, we're going to have them.
New Zealand was doing good down on the farm too. We've always been the greatest little country per head of population in the world, even when it comes to pigs.
Fame has come to this New Zealand pig, Barnum Verna of Pukekohe. She's the mother of the world record litter of 19 piglets. Keeping an eye on 19 babies was a bit too much for Verna. She rolled on 2, and then there were 17. In an exclusive interview, Verna said, "Thank you, Verna, and now it's time to give the children the air."
And the broadcaster of the day couldn't resist finishing with a few appalling piggy puns.
Yes, Verna certainly brought home the bacon. It's not bad for a ham. She couldn't have been any rasher.
We needed houses, and the government saw that we got them. They were the houses that Jack built, a tribute to the Labour Housing Minister John A. Lee, and to a building scheme that would change the way New Zealanders lived.
This is the largest state house in the Dominion. Everybody else in the street thought that the government was putting up a new school or a theatre until they saw Mr. and Mrs. Hall and their extra XOS family of 12 move in. Mrs. Hall has a lot of room now, and for the first time in her life has a real stove to call her own. She can now provide many extra delicacies for her family.
It's easy to forget now, but after the Depression of the 30s, for many Kiwis, a state house meant luxury.
This was a great day, the opening of the first government scheme dwelling. Everybody is happy.
Even royalty was impressed by our state houses. It was the 1950 Ideal Home Show in London, and New Zealand had a very special exhibit, a brand new state house.
The typical New Zealand state house, exhibited by the New Zealand government and representatives of our primary industries. A distinguished visitor to the house was Princess Elizabeth, who was met by Mr. Jordan, New Zealand High Commissioner in London. Every room was inspected by Her Royal Highness, who was impressed by the large windows and general airiness of the place. And of course, the Princess showed a particular interest in the kitchen and dining arrangements, strictly the women's department in any house.
It was a sporting answer to a cry for help. 1988, and reigning world squash champion, our own Susan Devoy, decides to walk the length of New Zealand to raise money for muscular dystrophy.
I think this first week will be the hardest because, you know, it's a week of solid walking like that when really I haven't done anything like that before. So, you know, it's going to be hard. You know, it's a serious walk, but we're going to have a lot of fun.
Everywhere she went, crowds turned out to see her, encourage her, and give her money. She ended up raising $250,000 and showing us all she's a champion with compassion. It was the Bonnie Babies' chance to put on a show. It was the New Zealand Industries Fair in Christchurch, 1947, but the most popular exhibit seemed to be 130 babies.
What New Zealand makes New Zealand. There were 130 starters in this event, which was held during the fair. It was Christchurch's biggest baby show yet. Here they are, and all girls. First prize was a tubular steel folding pram designed by a New Plymouth man specially for carriage on trams and buses. Never mind, you'll be Miss New Zealand one day.
More growing up. The clothes are a bit different and our idea of beauty has changed a little. But in 1949, we made an even bigger fuss of Miss New Zealand than we do today.
Until Miss Scanlon announces Miss Mary Woodward of Taranaki as Miss New Zealand of 1949. Chosen from 13 girls in New Plymouth and a further 13 in Wellington, Miss Woodward will leave New Zealand on the 13th of July. 13 must bring her luck, so we send her a baker's dozen of good wishes. On behalf of the Prime Minister, Mr. Nash offers his congratulations. He seems very happy in his task.
It's a great honor to be chosen as Miss New Zealand for 1949, and I assure you that I'll do my very best to do honor to our country while I'm away.
Even the Kiwi men were unbeatable. The 1924 All Blacks. They toured Great Britain, France and Canada, and no one could beat them. So they were known as the Invincibles. The tour score, 32 matches won, 838 points scored with only 116 against. The manager was Stan Dean, the captain was Cliff Porter, and the team included all-time greats such as Bert Cook and George Napier, who played in every match as fullback, aged only 19. The Invincibles. If rugby wasn't our #1 sport when they left, it certainly was by the time they returned. We had novel ways of getting rid of pests. There was a time when the biggest problem we seemed to face was an invasion of wasps.
They can sting repeatedly,
but
and the pain is
resourceful
more severe
Kiwis
than the bees.
managed to make a quid out of it.
It's thought that queen wasps were carried here by airplane from overseas towards the end of the war. And in 1946, the Department of Agriculture instituted control measures. 10% DDT powder was later tried and found successful, and this was made available free of charge to the public, and they were shown how to use it. In 1948, a bounty of 3p each was offered for queen wasps during the hibernation period. Queues lined up at the wasp control office with the kill. This boy made nearly 80 pounds at 3p a crack. Better proposition than collecting bottles.
New Zealand and ANZ, 150 years young. In wartime, even the essentials were hard to come by. Wartime meant sacrifice, for the women at home too, and life's little luxuries had to go.
Silk stockings mean much in a woman's life, and rightly so, in the piping days of peace. But these are not the days of peace. Attractive as they may be, silk stockings are not essentials, but life will go on without them. Substitutes will be found. But aeroplane fabric and parachutes are essentials of modern war. The silk that went for other things now helps pave the road for victory. The women of New Zealand are making a substantial contribution to the national welfare by uncomplainingly doing without silk stockings and other non-essentials. Those who believe that in the midst of the most frightful war in the world's history, civilian life can remain untroubled and unchanged are living in a fool's paradise.
We've always had an eye for the ponies. November 1947, and everybody...
As the 4-day cup meeting gets underway, and from the way the tote's sticking over, it looks as though the punters are laying it on with a will. Not a bad bet. And there's a man who's putting it on all round. Listen who's talking. The balloon's up, the barrier's down, and they're fighting it out on the rails all the way. Coming down to the straight, who is it? It's Congo Song. Congo Song bowling along from Gay Night, hanging on well, and Demetrius fighting it out. But Congo Song holds the lead as the field goes down to the post, and Congo Song will win 3 lengths out from Gay Night in the Metropolitan Challenge Stakes. 3 wins for Congo Song in 3 days. As Confucius says, if you're not in, you can't win, so we stick another pin through the old book and try again.
In the 60s, pirates were making waves on New Zealand radio.
You're listening to Radio Hauraki, top of the
The
dial,
Tiri,
and we're
a pirate
broadcasting
ship
test
which
transmission
changed
on
broadcasting
1480.
history. From international waters, the Haurakis took on state radio. October 23, 1966, and the police have orders to stop the Tiri sailing from Auckland. But 2,000 Hauraki supporters crowd the Western Viaduct as the pirates prepare to run the police blockade. Authorities try to lower the drawbridge, but fans stage a sit-in and the bridge stays up. With some onshore help, the Tiri breaks free, but the police launch catches up. The Hauraki pirates go to jail, but they've won a moral victory. Private radio is on the way.
Past 8 now.
In the 20s, our aviation heroes ruled the air. September 11, 1928, Captain Charles Kingsford Smith lands the Southern Cross at Wigram Aerodrome, Christchurch, and becomes the first pilot to cross the Tasman. Smithy's flight captured the public imagination, and 35,000 New Zealanders greeted the Fokker monoplane when it landed at Wigram. The flight had been a marathon 14 hours and 25 minutes, and they'd flown blind through a series of violent storms. Compared to modern aircraft, the Southern Cross was just a primitive wing powered by 3 engines. But to the Christchurch locals who greeted her, she was the space shuttle of her time. And there were always gadgets to help the farmer. For farmers, it was too good to be true. Someone had invented the radio-controlled sheepdog.
That's right. Bit fast, bit fast. Slower. Yeah, just a wee bit slower.
It was one of
Watch the
Country
dog.
Calendar's notorious hoaxes, but animal lovers fell for it hook, line and electrode and complained that new technology was cruel.
Drop. Forward.
Of course, farmers had a few more clues and saw the story for what it was, a classic Kiwi leg pull.
No, careful. You're playing with it now. Well, what do you think of the apparatus?
Looks pretty good to me. First time I've ever had a totally obedient dog.
For our soldiers, it was a Christmas with a difference. Europe 1944, and for many Kiwi soldiers, it was their first white Christmas. They were foreigners a long way from home, but when it came to Christmas, they still did things the Kiwi way.
The first step in turning pig into pork, and for the onlookers, quite a cheering sight. Bringing home the wine is... Having given a good account of the turkey hunt, it's time to cut the cackle and get on with the job. Tomorrow will be a lovely day. Christmas dinner is now on at Div headquarters, and General Sir Bernard Freiberg comes to see the traditional ceremony of the officers serving the men. Thanks to the good organization and teamwork, this feed will be remembered for months to come. It's done a lot to make 1944 a memorable Christmas.
Back at home, our soldiers were being entertained too.
You didn't want it when you could have had it. You never used to miss it till today. And even if you had it, I don't suppose you'd like it, so you're better off without it anyway.
Gracie Fields. She was a wartime sweetheart the world over, and at the height of her fame as the war in Europe was ending, she paid her Kiwi fans a visit.
What Gracie thinks of the steam and the sulphur, she tells us later. But like everyone else, she's fascinated by the mud pools.
Now, what do you think the sulphur springs did to my beautiful hair? I started out this morning nice and curly, but there's not a bit left after walking down those sulphur springs.
After years of war, the cheeky lass from Lancashire reminded us we could still laugh. Everybody turned out to see our new Queen for the first time. January 1954, the newly crowned Queen Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh tour New Zealand. It's the first time a reigning monarch has set foot on New Zealand soil.
Matamata County thrills to the simple friendliness of the Queen.
School children are issued with flags to wave, usually Union Jacks. And in Rotorua, the royal couple are greeted by 60,000 and a Maori welcome.
The first challenge is made by a chief of the Tuwharetoa tribe. A second challenge is now delivered. The challenger, Ananania Amohau, the Arawa chief who wrote the Maori Battalion's marching song.
She's been here several times since, but there's never been anything like the fervour the young Queen faced in the royal tour of 54. Even our mail service got the royal seal of approval. 1940, and the Royal Mail Service takes to the sky.
A Royal Mail airliner ran to Brongatai Airport. Mails which had been rushed out by motor car are loaded.
To obtain equalization of weight in the plane, the nose and wing compartments are used. The schoolboy with his youthful writings. The elderly lady with weekly letter to her distant son. The man concerned with practical matters of business. The little child corresponding with Father Christmas. The soldier writing home from camp. Your post office, a part of the biggest business organization in the world, is at your beck and call, hourly, daily, throughout the year. For but a few pence, your letter holds the key to the Royal Mail Services.
Linda Jones. By January the 22nd, 1979, she had turned the male racing fraternity upside down. But this would be Linda's biggest day. The race was the Wellington Derby, and Linda was riding Holy Toledo. It had been a long struggle, but Linda had beaten the odds and pioneered race riding for New Zealand women. Then she took on the Australian authorities and became the first woman to ride and win a race across the Tasman.
And to win a race here has been tremendous because, you know, you've got the best riders in the world and the best people.
Linda was a winner on and off the track. We honoured the bravery of our war heroes. Keith Elliott and Charles Upham, the desert soldiers of 1941 who became two of New Zealand's most celebrated war heroes.
For bravery in the field, the Victoria Cross for Lieutenant Upham on the left.
It was the first of Upham's two VCs. They were two Kiwi men just doing their duty.
To Sergeant Keith Elliott, veteran of Crete and Libya, went the VC. At Ruwezat, Sergeant Elliott led his 19 men in a desperate rearguard action, silencing 5 machine gun posts and capturing 130 prisoners, despite being wounded 4 times himself. But the VC was not the only recognition of the bravery of this farmer from Mangomari. His portrait by the official war artist will be added to New Zealand's Gallery of Heroes.
Back at home, the women were doing their bit. The Women's Land Service was formed in 1940 to relieve the wartime shortage of farm labour. Recruitment was slow at first, but then women were offered incentives such as uniforms, gumboots and stockings. By 1944, there were more than 2,000 of them, and we called them the Land Girls.
My friend and I took over this farm a year ago. We'd had 12 months training, and here we still work under the direction of the supervisor, who visits us often. We've got 300 acres and we run about 1,100 sheep. Both of us have always been keen on country life, so we started doing our bit in this war by working on the land. Now we've got this place on our own. Grand.
Some women took to more feminine pursuits. Miss New Zealand 1961. Beauty contests were in their heyday, and modern feminism had yet to reach our shores.
5 anxious girls, outwardly composed and exposed, offer themselves to the extremely critical gaze of the audience and the judges. The judges note the finer points from every angle. They're not allowed to touch these offerings, though. This is it. A decision has been made, and Joe Brown hands the vital information to the Mayor of Dunedin, who will proclaim the winner. Leonie Mann of Auckland becomes Miss New Zealand 1961. Kia ora, Leonie, and may your personality and vital statistics bring you further success as Miss New Zealand 1961.
The Americans sent us a very special ambassador.
Wheeling in comes this Liberator bomber, bringing Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt on her first visit to New Zealand. Her visit is a pleasant surprise, but all New Zealand is ready to welcome the distinguished wife of the President of the United States. Mrs. Roosevelt is here to visit American forces, and she will see something of the war work of our women. New Zealand is on this pleasant personality.
Many of the women at home would like, I think, to send a message to the women of New Zealand, because so many of our boys have been stationed here that they know already how hospitable and kind the women of this country have been to the sons and husbands and brothers of the women in the United States.
From our television screens came a rural sensation. Country Calendar. Some thought it was purely for the farmers, but sometimes it was the funniest show on TV. Of course, townies didn't always know they were having their legs pulled. Country Calendar played it straight. Some laughed, some were taken in, but we were all talking about country calendar. Out at sea, we took to fishing. The Bay of Islands, 1927, and a deep-sea fishing expedition sets off for a day's sport. Just a year before, American novelist Zane Grey had immortalised New Zealand as the angler's El Dorado. What he'd called virgin waters were now internationally acclaimed as some of the greatest big game fishing grounds in the world. And with catches of up to 7 or 8 monster marlin a day, who could argue? You can't beat a great Kiwi sense of humour. The turkey in gumboots, a cheeky hoax pulled by the 60s TV programme Town and Around.
The particular bird we've been having a close look at is wearing a man's size 8 gumboot. Do you find that black is the most satisfactory colour for all the birds?
No, we don't. We found that black is not attractive, especially on the female birds.
Is the female bird not attracted to the male because of the plain black colour?
That's right. We found that the attraction is not there, so this season we're going into pastel shades.
This would be pinks and blues and creams and even heliotrope, I suppose.
Yes, as long as they're a fairly bright pastel shade.
At last, the fighting was over.
And the war in Europe has ended.
VE Day, victory in Europe. It was the day New Zealand had a huge party.
The whistles have blown, the bells have rung, the bands are playing. The war in Europe.
It was a party to end all parties, but when the party was over, there was still work to be done.
Most of our bombers and fighters are now on their way to the Far East. We'll soon get an even worse taste than what we gave to the Hun.
And a very special band of soldiers returned home. The war was over and the celebrated warriors of the Maori Battalion were finally home. 650 didn't come back, but for the survivors, it was a homecoming like no other.
Here at Ngaruawahia, the arrival of the train bringing home the men is marked by little activity, but their people are waiting for them on the marae. Men of the Maori Battalion are home.
We welcomed home our heroes from the war.
I want to say how darn glad I am to be back in Little
1945, and a generation separated by war were at last together again. But the New Zealand the boys had come home to was changing. We were heading for the prosperous 50s and the post-war baby boom. New Zealand and ANZ, 150 years young.